Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the HSS Liberty and watched the stars ahead grow brighter as his fleet moved deeper into unknown space. The year was 2387 and humanity had just begun to reach beyond their home system to touch the void between worlds. 12 ships followed his flagship into the Kepler sector, each one representing the best that Earth could build and the bravest souls willing to risk everything for discovery. The Liberty was a beautiful ship, sleek and powerful, with weapons that could crack asteroids and shields that had never failed in battle. Her sister ships spread out in formation behind her like a pack of wolves hunting among the stars. The HSS Defender rode to starboard with Captain Amy Foster commanding her crew of 300. The HSS Victory kept pace to port under Captain Steve Hamilton, her engines burning bright blue in the darkness. 9 other vessels completed the 3rd Expeditionary Fleet, each one carrying humanity's hopes into the great unknown. Morrison had been chosen to lead this mission because he understood both war and exploration. At 45 years old, he had fought in the Mars Rebellion and helped establish the first permanent base on Europa. His dark hair showed streaks of gray now, and lines marked his face where worry and responsibility had carved their paths. But his eyes remained sharp and his mind clear as he guided humanity's children toward their destiny among distant suns. The Kepler sector had called to them for months with its promise of worlds that might support human life. Long-range scans showed systems rich with planets in the habitable zone around their stars. But something else lurked in this region of space, something that made sensors flicker and navigation computers struggle to maintain accurate readings. Gravitational anomalies twisted space in ways that defied explanation and made even the most experienced pilots nervous about their course. "Admiral, we're picking up something strange on the long-range sensors," Communications Officer Lisa Carter reported from her station. She was young and brilliant, barely 28, but already one of the finest sensor operators in the fleet. Her fingers danced across her controls as she tried to make sense of the readings flooding her screens. Morrison moved to stand behind her chair and studied the displays. What he saw made no sense according to everything humans understood about physics and space. A massive distortion hung in the void ahead of them like a wound in reality itself. It pulsed with energy that registered on every sensor they possessed, but followed no pattern that any of their computers could analyze. "How big is it, Lisa?" Morrison asked quietly. "At least 50 kilometers across, sir, but the readings keep changing. Sometimes it looks bigger, sometimes smaller. It's like space itself is moving in and out like breathing," she replied, her voice tight with confusion and growing fear. Dr. Helen Brooks, the fleet's chief science officer, had been studying the phenomenon for the past hour from her laboratory, deep in the Liberty's hull. She was a small woman with fierce intelligence burning in her green eyes and theories that often challenged accepted scientific thinking. When she arrived on the bridge, her face was pale and her hands shook slightly as she carried her data tablets. "Admiral, this isn't like anything in our database. The distortion appears to be folding space in on itself, creating pockets where our understanding of physics simply doesn't apply. Whatever caused this has technology far beyond our current capabilities," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Morrison felt ice form in his stomach as he considered the implications. Humanity had always assumed they were alone in the universe, or at least the first to develop interstellar travel. The idea that something else might be out here, something with powers they couldn't comprehend, changed everything about their mission and their future. "All ships, this is Admiral Morrison. Reduce speed to 1/4 and maintain defensive formation. We're approaching an unknown phenomenon that requires careful study before we proceed," he announced over the fleet communication channel. The 12 ships of the 3rd Expeditionary Fleet slowed their advance and spread into battle formation, their weapons powered but not yet targeted. Morrison had trained these crews for every possible scenario, from alien contact to stellar disasters, but nothing had prepared them for what they now faced. Engineer Rick Powell worked frantically in the engine room, trying to keep the Liberty's systems stable as waves of unknown energy washed over them. The distortion ahead seemed to be affecting their equipment in ways that made no scientific sense. Computers crashed and restarted randomly, artificial gravity fluctuated, and even their most basic instruments gave readings that contradicted each other from moment to moment. "Admiral, the distortion is growing," Lisa Carter reported, her voice rising with alarm. "It's expanding toward us at increasing speed." Morrison felt time slow around him as he realized their situation had become desperate. The phenomenon was no longer just something to study, but an active threat moving to engulf his entire fleet. He had seconds to make a decision that would determine the fate of 12 ships and nearly 4,000 human souls. "All ships, emergency, jump to hyperspace, execute immediately," he ordered. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew they were too late. The distortion expanded like a bubble of impossible space, washing over the fleet faster than light itself could travel. Reality seemed to bend and twist around them as the normal laws of physics failed. Morrison felt the deck of the Liberty buckle beneath his feet and watched his instruments explode in showers of sparks as forces beyond human understanding took hold of his ships. Lisa Carter's last transmission cut through the chaos of failing systems and screaming alarms. "Something's happening to space itself. We're being pulled into..." Then darkness swallowed the third expeditionary fleet, and the 12 ships vanished from normal space as if they had never existed. The void closed behind them without a trace, leaving only empty darkness where humanity's greatest expedition had been moments before. 300 years would pass before anyone learned what became of Admiral Morrison and his brave crews. 3 centuries during which humanity would grow to believe their heroes were lost forever to the hungry darkness between the stars. But in a place where time moved differently and reality followed alien rules, the third expeditionary fleet would fight for survival and emerge transformed into something the galaxy had never seen before. Commander Paul Garcia stood watch on the bridge of the ID's horizon as his ship patrolled the outer edge of Imperial Space 300 years after the third expeditionary fleet had vanished into legend. The galaxy had changed dramatically since those early days when humanity first reached for the stars alone. Now humans served alongside 17 other species in the Galactic Trade Empire, a vast alliance that stretched across thousands of star systems and brought peace to most of the known galaxy. The horizon was a perfect example of how far civilization had advanced through cooperation between different worlds and cultures. Her hull incorporated Zelani energy-resistant metals that could withstand direct hits from plasma cannons. Corthan quantum computers managed her navigation systems with precision that early human technology could never have achieved. Terran-designed sensors combined the best of human engineering with alien innovations to create detection capabilities that could spot a single ship at ranges measured in light years. Garcia himself represented the new breed of Imperial officer, trained from childhood to work with beings whose minds functioned in ways completely different from human thinking. At 38 years old, he had served on mixed crews since graduating from the Imperial Academy on New Geneva. His dark skin bore the ritual scars that showed respect for Corthan military tradition, while his uniform carried the symbols of 5 different species that had honored him for service above and beyond duty. The bridge crew reflected the diversity that made the Empire strong. Lieutenant Commander Vera Carlos, a Zelani female with pale blue skin and silver eyes, managed the tactical systems with the natural grace her people brought to all forms of combat. Chief Petty Officer Grok, whose name humans could barely pronounce, operated the engineering controls with 4 arms that moved in perfect coordination. Dr. Sarah Kim, one of only 3 humans aboard the ship, monitored the science stations and provided the flexibility of thinking that made her species valuable to any mixed crew. "Commander, I'm detecting massive energy signatures approaching from the direction of the Veil Nebula," Dr. Kim reported from her station, her voice carrying the excitement that came with discovering something completely unexpected. "Whatever's out there is big and moving fast, but the readings don't match anything in our database." Garcia moved to the main display and studied the sensor data flowing across the screens. What he saw made him frown with confusion and growing concern. The approaching objects showed energy outputs that rivaled Imperial battleships, but their signatures were unlike anything produced by known technology. More troubling still, there were 12 distinct contacts moving in perfect formation toward Imperial space. Vera, bring us to full alert and signal Fleet Command that we have unknown contacts approaching our patrol zone, Garcia ordered as he tried to make sense of what his instruments were telling him. Grok, I want full power to shields and weapons, but keep them in standby mode until we know what we're dealing with. The Zilani tactical officer's hands moved with liquid grace across her controls as she brought the horizon to battle readiness. Warning lights bathed the bridge in red as the crew prepared for potential combat. Throughout the ship, beings from a dozen different worlds worked together with the smooth efficiency that 3 centuries of cooperation had created. Commander, I'm getting better resolution on the contacts now, Dr. Kim announced, her voice rising with disbelief. Sir, these appear to be human ships, but they're not showing up in any Imperial registry. The hull configurations match historical records from the early colonial period, but that's impossible. Garcia felt his heart skip a beat as he considered what Kim was suggesting. Human ships from the colonial period would be over 300 years old, ancient relics that could never have survived so long in the void between stars. Yet the evidence on his screens seemed to support her impossible conclusion. The lead ship began transmitting on frequencies that hadn't been used by human vessels for centuries. The voice that came through the speakers carried the accent and formal speech patterns of old Earth, but spoke with an urgency that cut through 300 years of history like a knife through silk. This is Admiral Jake Morrison of the 3rd Expeditionary Fleet, requesting immediate priority communication with Earth Command. We have critical intelligence regarding a threat to human civilization and require emergency consultation with Fleet Command immediately. The bridge fell silent as every being present absorbed the implications of what they had just heard. The 3rd Expeditionary Fleet was legend, a cautionary tale told to young officers about the dangers of pushing too far into unknown space. Admiral Morrison was a name from history books, a hero who had vanished along with his entire command when humanity was still learning to walk among the stars. Admiral Morrison, this is Commander Paul Garcia of the Imperial defense ship Horizon. Garcia replied, his training taking over even as his mind struggled to process the situation. Sir, Earth Command was dissolved over 2 centuries ago when humanity joined the Galactic Trade Empire. I need to inform you that the year is now 2687 and the political situation has changed dramatically since your departure. A long pause followed before Morrison's voice returned, carrying a note of confusion and growing alarm. Commander, that's impossible. We've been gone for less than 2 years by our ship's chronometers. Something has happened to time itself during our mission, and we need to speak with someone in authority immediately. The threat we discovered affects not just humanity, but every living being in this galaxy. Garcia exchanged glances with his mixed-species crew and saw his own confusion reflected in their alien features. Whatever had happened to the 3rd Expeditionary Fleet clearly involved forces beyond normal understanding. The ships approaching. His position were definitely human in origin, but they carried energy signatures that defied explanation and seemed to bend space around them in ways that made his instruments struggle to maintain accurate readings. Admiral, I'm transmitting current political and military structure data to your fleet. The Galactic Trade Empire represents an alliance of 18 species, including humanity. We maintain peace through cooperation and mutual defense agreements. I can arrange immediate communication with Imperial Command, but I need to know more about this threat you mentioned. As Garcia spoke, the 12 ships of the 3rd Expeditionary Fleet emerged fully from the cosmic dust clouds of the Veil Nebula and revealed themselves in all their impossible glory. They were indeed the vessels that had vanished 3 centuries ago, but they had been changed by their experience in ways that challenged everything the Empire understood about technology and physics. The hulls of the human ships seemed to shimmer with materials that weren't quite solid, shifting between states of matter in patterns that hurt to watch. Their engines produced energy readings that should have been impossible according to known science, bending space around them in ways that suggested they had learned to manipulate reality itself. Most disturbing of all, the ships appeared larger than historical records indicated, as if they had somehow grown during their time away from normal space. Commander Garcia, we're detecting additional energy signatures throughout this sector, Dr. Kim reported, her voice tight with fear. Whatever changed those ships seems to be affecting local space as well. Reality itself appears to be becoming unstable in their presence. Garcia realized that the return of the Third Expeditionary Fleet represented far more than a miraculous survival story. These ships and their crews had been changed by forces that operated outside the normal laws of physics, transformed into something that might be humanity's salvation or its doom. The comfortable order of the Galactic Trade Empire was about to face its greatest test, and only time would tell whether the returning heroes would prove to be the galaxy's protectors or its destroyers. The delegation from the Imperial Defense Force approached the HSS Liberty with mixed feelings of wonder and dread as their shuttle crossed the impossible space between the two fleets. Commander Garcia led the group that included representatives from 3 different species, each one chosen for their expertise in first contact situations and their ability to remain calm under extraordinary circumstances. What they found aboard the legendary human warship would challenge everything they thought they knew about physics, time, and the nature of reality itself. Admiral Morrison greeted them at the airlock with a face that showed only 2 years of aging despite 3 centuries having passed in normal space. His uniform was the same style worn by human naval officers during the early colonial period, clean and pressed but bearing subtle modifications that suggested adaptation to conditions beyond anything in Imperial experience. Behind him stood officers whose names appeared in history books as heroes lost to the void, yet here they were, alive and apparently unchanged by their impossible journey through time and space. The interior of the Liberty revealed the most dramatic evidence of what had happened to the Third Expeditionary Fleet during their absence from normal reality. The corridors that had once followed standard human ship design now curved in ways that seemed to fold back on themselves, creating spaces that were larger inside than outside. Walls made of familiar metal were interwoven with materials that shifted between solid and translucent states, pulsing with inner light that responded to the thoughts and emotions of those who passed near them. "Welcome aboard the Liberty, Commander Garcia," Morrison said as he led the delegation toward the ship's briefing room. "I know this must be confusing for you, seeing us return after so long, but I need you to understand that from our perspective, we departed only 23 months ago on what should have been a routine exploration mission. The changes you see around you were necessary for our survival in a place where normal physics simply don't apply." Dr. Helen Brooks joined them in the briefing room, her appearance as unchanged as Morrison's, but carrying herself with a confidence that suggested she had learned things that fundamentally altered her understanding of the universe, the science. Officer, who had vanished as a promising young researcher, had returned as someone who spoke casually about concepts that challenged the very foundations of imperial scientific knowledge. "The spatial distortion that captured our fleet wasn't a natural phenomenon," Brooks explained as she activated displays that showed images and data unlike anything in Imperial databases. "It was a probe sent by entities we've come to call the Devourers, beings that exist outside normal spacetime and consume entire civilizations by unmaking them from reality itself. They don't destroy in any conventional sense, but rather cause their targets to cease having ever existed at all." The Imperial delegates listened in growing horror as Brooks described the realm where the Third Expeditionary Fleet had been trapped for 2 years of subjective time. Folded space was a dimension that existed between the normal universe and the void beyond reality, a place where the laws of physics bent to accommodate forces that operated according to principles completely alien to any known science. In this realm, the human ships had been forced to adapt or face complete dissolution into nothingness. "The Devourers have been testing your galaxy's defenses for over a century," Morrison continued, his voice carrying the weight of terrible knowledge. Every star that has gone dark without explanation, every world that has suffered seemingly natural disasters that left no survivors, every ship that has vanished in deep space, all of it has been them, probing for weaknesses and preparing for a full invasion that will unmake every living being in known space. Engineer Rick Powell demonstrated the changes that had allowed the human ships to survive in folded space by partially phasing the Liberty out of normal reality. The delegation watched in amazement as the ship became translucent, existing simultaneously in their dimension and somewhere else entirely. Weapons fired at the vessel passed harmlessly through its hull, while its own energy discharges struck targets with impossible precision, ignoring shields and armor as if they didn't exist. We learned to work with the physics of folded space rather than fighting against them, Powell explained as he returned the ship to normal reality. Our computers now process information using quantum principles that shouldn't be possible. Our engines draw power from the fabric of space itself, and our weapons can strike targets across dimensional barriers. We didn't just survive in that place, we evolved to match it. Commander Garcia studied the readings on his portable instruments and found that they couldn't even begin to analyze what they were observing. The human ships operated using principles that his most advanced sensors registered as violations of fundamental physical laws. Yet the evidence before his eyes proved that somehow these impossible technologies not only worked, but worked better than anything the Empire possessed. Admiral, how many of these devourers are there? And when do you expect them to begin their full invasion? Garcia asked, dreading the answer but needing to understand the scope of the threat facing all civilized worlds. Morrison exchanged glances with Brooks before answering, and Garcia saw in their faces the weight of knowledge that no one should have to carry. Based on what we observed during our time in folded space, there are thousands of devourer fleets moving between dimensions toward inhabited space. They've been traveling for eons, consuming entire galaxies as they advance toward what they perceive as the ultimate prize, a galaxy, where life has developed the complexity and diversity represented by the Galactic Trade Empire. The implications hit Garcia like a physical blow as he realized that the Empire's greatest strength, the cooperation and diversity that had brought peace to 18 different species, was also what made them such an attractive target for entities that fed on the complete negation of existence. Everything that civilization had built, every world that had been terraformed, every being that had been born in the past 1,000 years was at risk of being unmade so completely that it would be as if none of it had ever existed. Commander, I need you to understand something that your instruments can't measure, Brooks said quietly, her green eyes holding depths of knowledge that seemed infinite. The reason we were able to survive in folded space, the reason we were able to adapt our technology to work with alien physics, the reason we can now fight the Devourers on equal terms, it's because humanity possesses something that no other species we've encountered has. Garcia leaned forward, desperate to understand what could possibly give one species an advantage against forces that could unmake reality itself. What is it, Doctor? Brooks smiled for the first time since the delegation had come aboard, and in that expression Garcia saw both hope and a terrible determination that spoke of battles fought in dimensions where defeat meant more than death. Stubbornness, Commander. Pure, aggressive, human stubbornness that refuses to accept that anything is impossible. In a place where belief and will can literally reshape reality, that trait becomes the ultimate weapon against entities that exist, to negate existence itself. The briefing continued for hours as the returning heroes shared intelligence about Devour capabilities, their own adapted technologies, and the preparations that would be necessary to defend the galaxy against an invasion unlike anything in recorded history. By the time Garcia and his delegation returned to the horizon, they carried with them the knowledge that the comfortable order of the Galactic Trade Empire was about to face its ultimate test. As the Imperial ship prepared to transmit an emergency report to Fleet Command, Garcia looked back at the 12 human vessels that hung in space like ghosts returned from the dead. The third expeditionary fleet had departed as explorers and returned as something far more dangerous and far more necessary. They had become humanity's answer to an impossible threat, warriors trained by forces beyond imagination to fight battles that would determine whether reality itself would survive. The emergency session of the Imperial Defense Committee convened on New Geneva within 48 hours of Commander Garcia's report, bringing together representatives from all 18 member species to address the return of the Third Expeditionary Fleet and the threat they had revealed. The Grand Chamber that had witnessed 3 centuries of peaceful deliberation now buzzed with tension and barely concealed fear as beings who had grown comfortable with their place in an ordered universe faced the possibility that everything they had built might soon cease to exist. Admiral Morrison stood before the assembled representatives with the confidence of someone who had stared into the abyss between realities and emerged stronger for the experience. Behind him, holographic displays showed images and data from folded space that challenged everything the Empire's greatest scientists thought they knew about physics and the nature of existence itself. The faces looking back at him represented species that had achieved wonders through cooperation and specialization, but Morrison could see the seeds of their destruction in their very success. Chancellor Zeltar of the Zelani High Council was the first to speak, her musical voice carrying undertones of authority that had commanded respect across the galaxy for over 2 centuries. Admiral Morrison, while we appreciate the intelligence you have brought us regarding this potential threat, the Zelani people question whether humanity has the right to withhold advanced technology from the Empire's collective knowledge base. The folded space capabilities you describe could benefit all our species. Morrison studied the Chancellor's pale blue features and saw in her silver eyes the same assumption that had led to the Empire's fundamental weakness. The Zelani had become administrators and diplomats, their warrior heritage reduced to ceremonial displays and historical pride. 3 centuries of peace had made them soft in ways they didn't even recognize, dependent on others to fight the battles they no longer believed would come. Chancellor, the technology we developed wasn't created in a laboratory but forged through 23 months of fighting for survival against forces that exist to unmake reality itself, Morrison replied calmly. It requires understanding gained only through direct experience with alien physics and mental adaptation that can't be taught through instruction manuals. More importantly, it requires a mindset that refuses to accept defeat even when faced with impossible odds. General Throck of the Korthan War Ministry rose to his full 3-meter height, his crystalline carapace catching the chamber's light as he spoke in the rumbling tones that had once struck fear into the hearts of his peoples. Enemies, the Korthans have maintained our military traditions throughout the peace. Our weapons are still the most powerful in the Empire, and our warriors train constantly for battle. We do not need human technology to defend our worlds against any threat. Morrison had studied the Korthan military during his briefings with Imperial Command and recognized the fatal flaw in their thinking. They had indeed maintained their weapons and their training, but they had specialized in conventional warfare against known enemies using established tactics. When faced with an enemy that operated outside all known parameters, their rigid military structure would become a liability rather than a strength. General, I don't question the courage or skill of Korthan warriors, Morrison said respectfully. But the Devourers don't fight battles in any sense you would recognize. They don't seek to defeat their enemies, but to make them never have existed at all. Your weapons, no matter how powerful, cannot strike targets that exist partially outside normal space. Your armor, no matter how strong, cannot protect against attacks that negate matter at the quantum level. The session continued for hours as representative after representative revealed the same pattern that Morrison had feared he would find. Each species had excelled in their chosen specialization. The Tail had become master traders. The Vorthak had perfected terraforming technology. The humans had developed into skilled diplomats and mediators. But specialization had come at the cost of adaptability, and the comfortable order of the Empire had bred a dependency on collective security that would crumble when faced with truly alien threats. Dr. Brooks presented the scientific analysis. That proved Morrison's point with devastating clarity. The Empire's combined technologies, impressive as they were, all operated according to the same basic physical principles that govern normal space. Against enemies that could manipulate folded space and exist between dimensions, conventional science was not just inadequate but completely irrelevant. The political situation deteriorated rapidly as fear and suspicion replaced the cooperative spirit that had held the Empire together for 3 centuries. Representatives began to question not just human capabilities but human intentions, suggesting that the returning fleet might represent a threat to the established order rather than salvation from external enemies. Councillor Vex of the Ethereal Consortium voiced what many were thinking when he spoke in the translucent whispers that characterized his energy-based species. How do we know that these humans haven't been corrupted by their experience in this folded space they describe? Perhaps they return not as saviors but as agents of these devourers, seeking to weaken our defenses from within. Morrison felt anger flash through him at the suggestion, but kept his expression neutral as he considered how to respond to such fundamental mistrust. These beings had lived in peace for so long that they had forgotten the hard realities of survival against hostile forces. They viewed the changes in his fleet as corruption rather than evolution, threats rather than adaptation to meet an impossible challenge. Counselor, if we were agents of the Devourers, we would hardly have warned you of their approach, Morrison replied evenly. We would have encouraged you to maintain your current defensive posture while the enemy prepared their final assault. Instead, we're here trying to help you understand that everything you think you know about warfare and defense needs to change if you want to survive what's coming. The session reached its crisis point when Captain Amy Foster of the HSS Defender was granted permission to demonstrate the human fleet's capabilities in a joint training exercise with Imperial forces. What followed exposed the Empire's weakness in ways that no amount of discussion could have achieved, revealing the gap between their conventional excellence and the requirements for survival against truly alien enemies. Foster's ship faced off against a combined squadron that included the finest vessels from 6 different species, each one representing centuries of technological advancement and tactical development. The Imperial ships moved with precision and coordination, their weapons synchronized for maximum effect and their defenses layered with redundant systems that had never failed in conventional combat. Then the Defender began to phase between dimensions. The Imperial squadron found themselves fighting an enemy that existed partially outside normal space, immune to their most powerful weapons while striking back with energy discharges that ignored shields and armor entirely. Foster's crew, trained by 23 months of survival in folded space, reacted with intuitive understanding of 3-dimensional combat that no amount of simulation could have provided. The exercise ended with the complete defeat of the Imperial squadron without the Defender suffering any significant damage. More importantly, it demonstrated that the gap between human capabilities and Imperial technology wasn't just a matter of different equipment but represented a fundamental evolution in thinking about reality itself. In the aftermath of the demonstration, the Empire's political structure began to fracture as some species demanded immediate access to human technology while others called for the quarantine or destruction of the returning fleet. Fear replaced cooperation as the foundation of Imperial unity, and Morrison realized that the greatest threat to galactic civilization might not be the approaching Devourers but the Empire's inability to adapt to changed circumstances. As emergency sessions continued through the night, a conspiracy developed among certain factions to seize the human ships and eliminate their crews, keeping the technology while removing what they perceived as dangerous human unpredictability. Morrison and his officers prepared for the possibility that they might have to fight not just alien invaders but the very civilization they had returned to save. The comfortable order of the galactic trade empire was collapsing under the weight of revelations it couldn't accept, and Morrison feared that by the time the various species learned to work with humanity's new capabilities, the Devourers would already be unmaking reality itself across thousands of worlds. The crisis that would reshape the galaxy began not with explosions or declarations of war, but with a subtle wrongness in the space around. New Geneva that made reality itself seem fragile and uncertain. Devourer scouts emerged from folded space near the Imperial capital like wounds opening in the fabric of existence, their forms defying every attempt by sensors to define exactly what they were or how they moved through dimensions that shouldn't exist. The Empire's combined fleet responded with the confidence born of 3 centuries of technological supremacy, deploying over 400 ships representing the finest military achievements of 18 different species. Admiral Kethver of the Unified Defense Command coordinated the response from his flagship, the massive Zilani dreadnought Eternal Harmony, while squadron leaders across the fleet prepared to demonstrate that no threat could stand against Imperial unity and firepower. The engagement began with textbook precision as Imperial forces opened fire with weapons that could shatter moons and defensive screens that had never been penetrated by any known technology. Energy beams that burned with the heart of stars reached out toward the Devourer scouts, followed by kinetic projectiles traveling at significant fractions of light speed and exotic matter warheads that could destabilize atomic bonds across entire STARS HIPS. Every shot passed harmlessly through targets that existed partially outside normal space. Commander Garcia watched from the bridge of the horizon as the most powerful military force in galactic history discovered that all their weapons were useless against enemies that operated according to principles completely alien to conventional physics. Zilani energy shields collapsed not from overwhelming force, but from attacks that unmade the very concept of protection at the quantum level. Corthan armor plating, forged from the strongest materials known to science, meant nothing against weapons that erased the idea of the target rather than destroying it. Through conventional damage, the Imperial fleet began to die not in explosions of light and sound, but in silent negation as ships simply ceased to exist, their crews and entire histories unmade so completely that it became impossible to remember they had ever been there at all. Entire squadrons vanished from reality while their support vessels forgot they had ever had companions, leaving gaps in formation that no one could explain. Then the 12 ships of the 3rd Expeditionary Fleet entered the battle. Admiral Morrison led his transformed vessels into combat with the calm precision of someone who had learned to fight impossible enemies in dimensions where defeat meant more than death. The HSS Liberty phased between normal space and folded reality as it advanced, existing simultaneously in multiple dimensions while coordinating attacks across barriers that separated different layers of existence. Captain Amy Foster aboard the HSS Defender demonstrated the evolution that 23 months of survival had created in human tactical thinking. Her ship danced through formations of Devourer scouts like a living thing, anticipating movements that followed no pattern recognizable to conventional analysis, while striking back with weapons that channeled the strange physics of folded space to wound enemies that should have been invulnerable. The turning point came when Lieutenant Danny Price, barely 25 years old but hardened by experiences that had aged his soul beyond his years, realized the fundamental nature of the enemy's weakness. As beings that existed to unmake reality, the Devourers were vulnerable to things that aggressively asserted existence through pure force of will and refusal to accept negation. All human ships. This is Lieutenant Price aboard the Victory. His voice cut through the chaos of interdimensional battle with clarity born of desperate inspiration. The enemy feeds on doubt and acceptance of defeat. Every time we question whether we can win, we make ourselves easier targets for negation. Fight like humans. Fight like you're too stubborn to be unmade. The human crews responded with something that transcended mere military discipline or tactical training. They fought with the aggressive determination that had carried their species from caves to stars, the refusal to accept defeat that had seen them survive ice ages and plagues and wars that should have destroyed them completely. In the strange physics of folded space, that human trait became a literal weapon against enemies that sought to negate existence itself. Commander Karen Webb led the HSS Victory in a charge that defied every principle of space combat as her ship deliberately rammed through a formation of Devourer scouts while existing partially outside normal reality. The enemy vessels, beings of pure negation, found themselves unable to unmake something that refused so aggressively to be destroyed that it reshaped local space through sheer determination. The battle raged across multiple dimensions simultaneously, as human ships wielded technologies that channeled human stubbornness into physical force, capable of matching alien powers that operated beyond conventional physics. Morrison coordinated attacks that took place in folded space, while Foster provided covering fire from normal reality, their combined efforts creating a defensive perimeter around the surviving Imperial vessels. The Devourers began to withdraw, not because they had been defeated in any conventional sense, but because they encountered something they had never faced before in eons of consuming galaxies. Humanity's absolute refusal to accept that anything was impossible created a form of existence so aggressively real that it caused beings of pure negation to pause and reconsider their approach. As the alien scouts retreated into the dimensions between realities, the surviving Imperial fleet found themselves witnessing the emergence of a new form of warfare that operated according to principles none of them could fully understand. The human ships had not just fought the Devourers, but had fought them on equal terms, using technologies and tactics that merged conventional science with forces that should not have existed. In the aftermath of humanity's impossible victory, the political landscape of the galaxy changed forever. Representatives who had spent days arguing about human authority and the distribution of advanced technology now faced the undeniable reality that only humanity possessed the capability to defend civilization against the approaching invasion. Chancellor Zeltar of the Zelani High Council was the first to acknowledge the new order when she formally requested that Admiral Morrison assume supreme command of Imperial Defense Forces. Admiral, it is clear that our conventional approaches to warfare are inadequate against this threat. We place ourselves under human protection and ask only that you defend our worlds as you would defend your own. General Throck of the Corthans followed with a gesture that would have been unthinkable weeks earlier, removing his ceremonial war mask and offering it to Morrison as a symbol of transferred military authority. The Corthans acknowledge human supremacy in matters of war against impossible enemies. Our warriors will serve under human command until this threat is ended. Morrison accepted the responsibility that fate and circumstance had thrust upon him, understanding that humanity had become not conquerors of the Empire, but its protectors against forces that no other species could resist. The returning fleet that had left Earth as explorers 3 centuries ago now stood as the galaxy's shield against the dark between dimensions. The final scene of transformation took place in the depths of space near the galactic rim, where long-range sensors detected new spatial anomalies approaching from the void between galaxies. Morrison stood on the Bridge of the Liberty, now bearing the rank of Supreme Commander of Imperial Defense, and watched as more human ships emerged from folded space, vessels from other expeditions that had vanished over the centuries, each one returning changed and equipped to fight battles beyond imagination. The HSS Endeavour appeared first, followed by the HSS Pathfinder and 8 other ships that had been lost to various spatial anomalies over the past 300 years. Each vessel carried crews that had been forged in the crucible of folded space, transformed by their struggle against impossible conditions into something that could stand against entities that existed to unmake reality itself. Commander Garcia, now serving as Morrison's liaison to the reformed Imperial Council, received reports that more anomalies were appearing throughout the galaxy as other lost human expeditions found their way home. The species that had once considered themselves average members of a cooperative alliance had become the foundation upon which galactic civilization would survive or fall. The story concluded with Morrison issuing orders to human ships that now patrolled folded space itself, protecting reality from entities that would unmake it. Humanity had not conquered the Empire through force of arms, but had inherited it through their unique ability to adapt and survive against forces that reduced other species to helpless terror. As new Devourer fleets approached from the dark between galaxies. Humanity stood ready with ships that existed partially outside normal reality and crews trained by experiences that no simulation could replicate. The galaxy's future rested in the hands of a species that had learned the ultimate lesson of survival, that nothing was impossible as long as someone was stubborn enough to refuse defeat.